Imagine you're in southern Morocco. West of the Atlas Mountains, on a dry plain, there's an old mining tunnel. Half a century ago, men used to dig barite out of these rocks. One afternoon in 1961, a worker saw something in the tunnel wall. A skull, half buried in the rock. It looked like a child's head. The worker stopped. He reported it. The tunnel was closed. Archaeologists came. The skull was carefully extracted, washed, measured. The face was familiar. The jaw, the cheeks, the placement of the eyes. It looked enough like us that any textbook would have called it an early modern human. They gave it an age, around 40,000 years before present. That was wrong. 50 years later, in 2017, a German team retested the same skull. The Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. They used thermoluminescence dosimetry and electron spin resonance. They published the result in Nature.
The real age came out, 315,000 years. Then it was removed. In its place, a new question was set down, a more uncomfortable one. If Homo Sapiens was already walking in Morocco 315,000 years ago, then who made us? They lived first, then we did. So we came from someone. So there were others before us, and we are only just beginning to understand who they were. Today, we'll open 7 seals. By the end, I'll tell you this. For a long time, science assumed humanity was a single species. It was wrong. You are not a single species. You are at least 5 different human species combined into one. Some of them have names, some still don't, and there are others still waiting to be discovered.
In the previous journey, we followed the story of the Exodus from Africa. We talked about how modern humans have been outside the continent since 200,000 BCE, how they used the coastal route, how they spread into Asia, how we are the descendants of the people who were drowned in Sundaland. In the faunal seal, there was a hidden truth in DNA. In your DNA, there are traces of at least 2, probably 3 or 4 lost human species. We left a question unanswered. If modern humans have existed since 200,000 BCE, then who came before? Who were the humans before us? What was the process that made us this way? The answer to this question lies along a great line that stretches from Morocco in the north to Ethiopia in the east, to Johannesburg in the south, then to the Atapuerca Mountains of Spain, then to Hubei province in China. Along this line, in the last 20 years, and especially since the 2010s, paleoanthropology has been rewritten as a science. The people before the Sumerians were the Ubaidians. The people before them were the valley dwellers. The people before them were the coastal walkers. Now, who came before them?
The 7 seals we'll open today are these: the oldest sapiens face in Morocco, the parallel births in Ethiopia, the small-brained burial people of South Africa, the population that made our ancestors in Europe, a brand new species added to the scientific literature in 2021, a skull hidden under a Chinese well, and at the end, in the mirror of DNA, the fact that nobody is pure. There are no answers, but with each seal, there will be slightly fewer questions. Let's go 100 kilometers west of Marrakesh. Inland from the Atlantic, in the western foothills of the Atlas Mountains, there's a dry hill, Jebel Irhoud. It means nothing to local people. A mining hill, a rocky outcrop. In the 1960s, barite was being mined here. In one tunnel, in 1961, a skull came up. A miner working with a pickaxe and dynamite saw something white in a piece that had fallen from the ceiling. He picked it up. It was half a human head. The miner told his foreman. The foreman notified the authorities. The tunnel was stopped. The archaeologist Emile Annucci came, then Jacques Briggs. In the upper layers there were animal bones, wild horses, gazelles, antelopes, fire traces, chipped stone tools,
Middle Paleolithic type. The skull was complete. The face was familiar, very close to that of modern humans. The jaw delicate, the nose relatively narrow, the cheeks forward, the placement of the eyes pulled forward. Only the brain case was different, longer than today's human, lower, more protruding at the back.
Inucci found it in 1962 and interpreted it as 40,000 BCE. Some said it might be older, perhaps 130,000 BCE, but no precise age could be determined. Because at that time, dating technology was either radioactive carbon, which only reaches back 40,000 years, or thick stratigraphic estimates, very imprecise. The skull sat for 50 years in the storeroom of the Moroccan Archaeology Museum in Rabat. The classification academia gave it, early modern human. Perhaps one of the oldest examples of Homo sapiens, but its age was accepted as between 100,000 and 40,000 BCE. Then Jean-Jacques Hublin came. Hublin is a French paleoanthropologist. He has been studying Jebel Irhoud since the 1980s. He demanded the site be reopened. In 2004, the Moroccan state allowed excavation to resume. Hublin descended with a team from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. They dug for 13 years. By 2017, they had retrieved new skull fragments, jaws, teeth, and tools from the floor of the dig. The team's real achievement was this. They collected the chipped flint and dated it using thermoluminescence dosimetry. Thermoluminescence rests on this principle. When an object is heated, for example in a fire, the radioactive electrons inside it are zeroed out. Over time, they begin to accumulate again. From the amount of accumulation, the time of last heating can be calculated. That is, when was this stone tool last thrown in a fire? The result was announced: 315,000 plus or minus 34,000 years before present. 315,000, almost 10 times the previous estimate. The academic world was shaken, because until 2017, the oldest estimate for Homo sapiens was the Homo Sapiens skull in Ethiopia, 195,000 BCE. Jebel Irhoud pushed this back by 120,000 years. But the truly disturbing detail was geographic. Homo Sapiens was in Ethiopia, East Africa. The traditional cradle region of sapiens was accepted to be East Africa. The whole Pan-African origin hypothesis rested on this assumption. Speciation in one region, then spread. Jebel Irhoud is 5,000 kilometers from East Africa, the opposite corner, the northwest tip of the continent. If Homo sapiens was in Morocco 315,000 years ago, then at the same time it must have been in other corners of the continent, because a species does not spread 5,000 kilometers in a single night. Hublin's conclusion was this: Homo sapiens was not born in a single place. In various regions of the African continent, in parallel, the same genetic pool evolved in similar ways in different places. This was called the Pan-African origin hypothesis. That is, modern humans came out not from one well of the continent, but from the whole of it. This was no ordinary academic correction, because the single birth in East Africa hypothesis had been the backbone of paleoanthropology for half a century. Genetic data supported it too. Mitochondrial DNA studies pointed to East Africa. Now, the entire model was being redrawn. There was another detail. The face of the Jebel Irhoud skull is modern, but the brain case is still archaic. The back is protruding, low, and elongated. So the face is in some sense completed, but the brain is still changing. Mosaic evolution. Different parts of the body evolved at different speeds. What is this? A transitional species? A semi-sapiens? Or is this the oldest form of sapiens itself? The carefully chosen sentence in Hublin's 2017 paper was this: these specimens provide further evidence for a Pan-African origin of Homo sapiens. An academic sentence, but what it implied was much bigger. 315,000 years before us, in Morocco, there were people whose faces already resembled ours. They were not yet quite sapiens, but they looked like us. Were they our ancestors?
Or were they a cousin we passed by? In local Berber myths, there's a story. In the Atlas Mountains, before the first humans, a people called the Ikalan lived inside the mountain. They were not like us now, but they resembled us. They were there before the mountain was made. Then they merged into the mountain. The Berber myth was told for millennia before the Jebel Irhoud skull was found in 1961. Anucci didn't know it. It wasn't mentioned in Hublin's 2017 paper either. There is no answer. But from Morocco to Ethiopia, from one end of the continent to the other, at the same time, similar faces emerge. Now, let's go to Ethiopia.
Let's go to the southwest of Ethiopia, to a region near the Kenyan border. In the center of the Great Rift Valley, among the alluvial deposits of the Omo River, is a small site, Omo Kibish. In 1967, Kenyan paleoanthropologist Richard Leakey came here during an excavation. His father Louis Leakey's East African Sapiens Cradle project was ongoing. At Omo Kibish, he found several skulls and skeletal fragments. 3 were especially important: Omo 1, Omo 2, and Omo 3. Omo 1 was unambiguously of modern human form: round brain case, high forehead, modern jaw. Initial age estimates were uncertain. Argon dating in 2005 gave a precise result: 195,000 BCE. 195,000 years. Until the Jebel Irhoud finding, that is, until 2017, Omo 1 was the world's oldest Homo sapiens. The entire East African cradle theory had been built on this skull. In the same region, 200 kilometers north of Omo Kibish, in the Awash Valley, there was another finding. In 1997, during excavations by Tim White and the Ethiopian team, 3 skulls came out near the village of Herto Bori. They were published in 2003.
The age of the Herto skulls, 160,000 BCE. The face, more modern. The brain, almost full modern size, 1450 cc. Indisputable members of Sapiens. Naming: Homo Sapiens Idaltu. Idaltu means ancestor in the local Afar language. But there was something stranger at Herto. One of the skulls was specifically a young adult. This skull had been shaped. There were cut marks on the scalp and traces of soft tissue removal. Anthropologists interpreted this as a skull ritual of the dead. That is, after killing the person, they separated the head, stripped the flesh, removed the brain, polished the bone, and perhaps used it as a cult object. 160,000 years ago. Very shortly after the birth of modern humans, if birth is even the right word, these people were already processing their dead with such complex ritual. Now the picture has gotten more complicated. Jebel Irhoud in Morocco at 315,000 BCE. Omo Kibish in Ethiopia at 195,000 BCE. Herto in Ethiopia at 160,000 BCE. The same species, the same continent, different regions, different times, but all of them modern humans.
A problem. Between 315,000 and 195,000, there is a gap of 120,000 years. What happened in this gap? Where did the Jebel Irhoud people go? Where did the Omo Kibish people come from? Are they relatives? The same species? Or did Jebel Irhoud disappear and Omo Kibish start independently? Tim White's 2003 paper contained this sentence: "These specimens demonstrate that early Homo sapiens had a pan-continental distribution in Africa," meaning there's no single center. There are multiple centers. They all evolved in parallel. In academic terms, this is called mosaic evolution. Different parts of a species' body evolve at different times, in different regions, at different speeds. Then, finally, when they meet again geographically, they mix. A single species emerges. Among local peoples in Ethiopia, especially in the Afar region, a legend is told. The first humans appeared in the rainy marshes of the Awash Valley. But those first humans weren't our ancestors. They were the Wega. The Wega disappeared. After them, we came. When the Wega disappeared, it was called the Great Rain. Then other humans, ones who resembled us, entered the valley. The Wega legend was first written down around 6000 BCE, before Ethiopia's Ge'ez literary tradition, in Afar oral records.
millennia before Tim White's 1997 discovery. Local memory could be coincidence, but it's striking. The Wega disappear, then others come. The folk version of mosaic evolution. In East Africa, between Omo and Herto, there's yet another excavation around 100,000 BCE, Aduma. The skull remains here are around 105,000 to 79,000 BCE, fully modern. The tools resemble the early pre-Aurignacian types seen in the Levant. So, in Ethiopia, parallel. At the same time, side by side, multiple modern human groups. Did they mix with each other? Did they share their lives? We don't know. The bones alone don't say. But calling this one species isn't quite right. Calling this a species pool is more accurate. Inside this pool, there was something else. A very small-brained human who buried his dead. When we found him, science was shaken again. There is no answer, but we're going to South Africa. Northwest of Johannesburg, in the Sterkfontein region, stretches the UNESCO World Heritage Site, known as the Cradle of Humankind. Dozens of limestone caves and underground systems, Sterkfontein, Swartkrans, Kromdraai. For years, human ancestor fossils have come from this region, Australopithecus, early Homo, Paranthropus. Within these systems was a small, unnoticed cave, Rising Star. The name means rising star. For years, cave explorers had been in and out of here, but the interior map had never been fully drawn. In September 2013, two explorers, Stephen Tucker and Rick Hunter, discovered a crevice leading to the deeper parts of Rising Star. The crevice was very narrow, just 7.5 centimeters wide. An adult human could barely fit. At first, passing through this crevice was at the cost of their lives. Tucker and Hunter followed the crevice with their lights and emerged into a lower chamber. The floor was covered with bones. So many bones, all looking human. None tangled together, not piled, as if intentionally placed. They went back to the crevice entrance. They climbed up. They contacted paleoanthropologist Lee Berger at the University of the Witwatersrand. Berger is a famous excavator. In 2008, he had discovered Australopithecus sediba in the same region. But this time, the situation was different. His body wouldn't fit through Rising Star's narrow passage. Berger made a social media call. He was looking for slim-bodied, cave-experienced, paleoanthropology-trained female researchers. Male researchers physically wouldn't fit the passage. Hundreds of applications came in. Berger chose 6 female researchers. They were called underground astronauts. Lindsay Eves, Marina Elliott, Becca Pioxoto, Aaliyah Gerthoff, Hannah Morris, Ellen Feuerriegel. Most in their 20s, all paleoanthropology doctoral students or recent doctorates. In November 2013, the excavation began. Through the 7.5 centimeter crevice, down a 7-meter vertical drop, then crawling sideways for 30 meters, then another 12-meter vertical descent. They emerged into the Dinaledi chamber. Dinaledi means stars in the local Sotho language. When they reached the chamber floor, they said they cried because they had never seen human remains on this scale before. In a 21-day first expedition, over 1,500 bone fragments were extracted. The number grew in subsequent expeditions, about 1,800 fragments, belonging to at least 15 different individuals. These were not Homo sapiens. The brain capacity was strikingly small. Modern humans average 1,350 cc. Naledi's brain capacity is about 500 cc, less than half, exactly the size of Australopithecus. But not the body. The body and face are almost modern human profile. The foot, modern. The hands, especially the fingers, graspy but human-like. Perhaps they had excellent reaching ability. They were either very good climbers or very good tool users. The more disturbing detail? Their death positions. The bones in the Dinaledi chamber lay neatly side by side. Most showed no trauma. They had not died by attack or accident. They had not been swept by water. If there had been water flow, the bones would be disordered, the smaller ones carried farther than the larger. There were no remains of flesh that scavengers couldn't reach. Scavengers can't get this deep. These bodies had been brought here, consciously.
That is, Homo naledi took their dead into a cave through an extremely narrow passage and placed them deliberately. This, most likely, is intentional burial behavior, the first burial behavior. Until now, science knew that intentional burial was a behavior unique to Homo sapiens and late Neanderthals. It begins around 100,000 BCE. Consciousness, spiritual thought, symbolism, the totality of these is defined as the modern behavioral complex. This complex was thought to be specific to large-brained species. Now, in front of us is a species with a 500cc brain. They bury their dead. How is this possible? The age of Naledi was unknown for a long time because there were no datable sediments in the cave. In 2017, the Wits University team tried a different method: uranium-thorium on the enamel layers of teeth, then electron spin resonance on the flow systems of the cave. The result? 335,000 to 236,000 BCE. At the same time, Homo sapiens walked at Jebel Irhoud. At the same time, Homo Kibish hadn't yet begun. Naledi lived contemporaneously with modern humans. This is a bomb for paleoanthropology, because until 2013, the principle small brain equals primitive mind was accepted almost as axiom. Modern consciousness was said to be possible only in a large brain. Spiritual thought, symbolism, burial ritual were said to be possible only at modern brain capacity. Naledi tore this down. In 2022, the Berger team published an additional finding. In deeper parts of the same cave, in another chamber, Lasidi, fire traces were found. Burnt anthracite, burnt bones. Naledi was using fire. 500cc brain, fire in the cave, burial ritual, a species working as a team through a complex passage. What class does this fit into? In academia, Lee Berger is criticized. Some paleoanthropologists say Berger has popularized too much and published too quickly. But none of them deny the reality of the bones. None of them question the age. The only thing questioned is interpretation. Did Naledi really bury its dead consciously? Or did these bodies somehow enter the cave through natural processes? There is no answer. But it's hard to argue that the bodies passed through that narrow crevice on their own. No water current, no predators, no natural slope. A very narrow corridor, a very steep drop, a very tight crevice. Someone brought them there. Someone brought them there. Someone small-brained. Perhaps the earliest sign of what would become human consciousness. In the traditions of the local San, Khoisan, there is a being called the Mountain Man. Very old, very small, but one of our ancestors. They've disappeared now. They retreated into the caves. The San tradition is an oral history stretching back thousands of years, long before Berger's 2013 discovery. It's impossible to see Naledi as a direct ancestor of modern humans. The anatomy is different. Naledi is a cousin, but they lived in the same period, on the same continent, in the same geography as sapiens. Perhaps they met. Perhaps they saw each other. Did they mix? We don't know. There's no DNA. Bones never preserved in the damp cave. Perhaps one day, DNA will be extracted. If it is, we may learn that the unknown ancestral trace in the DNA of modern sub-Saharan African peoples is Naledi. Perhaps. The ghost population that David Reich mentioned in 2020, the ancestor whose trace appears in 2 to 19% of sub-Saharan African DNA, its name might be Naledi. Perhaps. There is no answer. But the cave is still there. The Dinaledi chamber is still there. The 1800 bones are still there. And the fact that someone brought them there, that doesn't change.
Now let's go north, Europe. Today, in southwest Germany, about 10 kilometers east of the city of Heidelberg, there's a small village called Mauer. The year 1907. Workers were digging in the Grafenrhein sand pit near the village. At 27 meters deep, they found a lower jawbone. The peasant worker Daniel Hartmann cleaned the jaw and gave it to his teacher, Otto Schoensack. Schoensack immediately understood it was a human jaw, but it resembled no jaw he had ever seen. Thicker, the chin point not protruding, the side different from a modern human's. In 1908, Schoensack gave this remain a new species name, Homo heidelbergensis, Heidelberg man. The age estimate was uncertain at the time. Only geological stratigraphy existed. It was said to be between 200,000 and 500,000 years. Modern techniques today give a more precise number, about 600,000 years. A single jaw doesn't say much on its own, but after this jaw, similar remains began turning up everywhere. In Germany, in Greece, in Zambia, in China, in India, even in Britain. Between 700,000 and 200,000 BCE, Heidelbergensis-like skulls were found in almost every part of the Old World.
What distinguished this species? A few basic features. Brain size, 1100 to 1300 cc. Slightly smaller than modern humans, but much larger than Australopithecus. Eyebrows prominent, like Neanderthals, but less so. Face relatively flat. Body powerful. Bones thick, arm muscles large. Most importantly, behavior. Heidelbergensis used fire. They made spears, in a real, planned, designed sense. The wooden spear fragments found at Schoningen, Germany in 1995 are 300,000 years old. They were long, balanced, sharp-pointed weapons made for hunting. They required a complex production process, sharpening one end, controlling the grain, balancing. So Heidelbergensis was not just a hunter, but a planned hunter, thinking ahead, making tools for the future. These are signs of high consciousness. Now, let's go to the most astonishing finding. In northern Spain, near the city of Burgos, in the Atapuerca Mountains, there's a cave system, the Sierra de Atapuerca, UNESCO World Heritage. Excavation has been ongoing since 1976. Inside the Atapuerca system, there's a cave, Cima de los Huesos, pit of bones. The name is no coincidence, because at the bottom of the cave, 13 meters deep, in a narrow pit, 28 different human skeletons were found.
28 individuals, all Heidelbergensis. Age, about 430,000 BCE. Most bodies almost complete, very few bones missing. Children, adolescents, adults, the elderly. All placed in the same pit. The Spanish paleoanthropologist Juan Luis Arzuaga heads the excavation team. Arzuaga's interpretation is clear. These bodies were thrown into Cima de los Huesos consciously. The shape of the pit is a funerary pit. There are no animal bones in the pit, only human bones. Stone tools and ornaments belonging to most are there, perhaps deliberately left offerings. 430,000 BCE. If the interpretation is correct, this is the world's oldest grave. 100,000 years older than the lady. 100,000 years older than the existence of modern humans. A species that buried its dead, or more accurately, placed them deliberately. Heidelbergensis. Now the DNA bomb comes. In 2013-2014, an attempt was made to extract DNA from the Cima de los Huesos bones. This was the oldest DNA study ever attempted. The result surprised. The mitochondrial DNA from the bones was not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, not Sapiens, a completely different profile. In 2016, more precise results came. The Cima de los Huesos Heidelbergensis people were close to Neanderthals. They could be their ancestor, but their mitochondrial DNA was closer to Denisovan. So Heidelbergensis was the ancestor of both Neanderthals and Denisovan. This is a huge finding because Heidelbergensis was no longer just a European species. It was the ancestor of all later great Eurasian species. Modern humans too? Perhaps. The genetic data isn't clear on this, but the possibility is one ancestral heidelbergensis population stayed in Africa and produced the ancestor of modern humans. Another ancestral heidelbergensis population crossed into Eurasia and split into Neanderthal and Denisovan. After hundreds of thousands of years of separation, when modern humans came out of Africa, they met their descendants.
This is why modern humans could mix with Neanderthals, because they were our cousins, the same ancestor, heidelbergensis. In the villages near Atapuerca, in Basque traditions, there's a legend. The Mairu, ancient people, lived in the mountains. They were bridge masters. They carried great stones, built passes. When Christianity came, the Mairu retreated into mountain caves. They are still sleeping there. Could the Mairu legend remember heidelbergensis? Did a memory survive from hundreds of thousands of years ago? This is hard to say, but the Basque language is one of the world's oldest, pre-Indo-European, perhaps a remnant of Europe's older inhabitants. Perhaps the Mairu legend is also part of that remnant. There is no answer, but Cima de los Huesos at Atapuerca is still there. The 28 individuals are still there. The shape of the pit is still the same. Heidelbergensis made us. But who was Heidelbergensis? Modern paleoanthropology has begun asking this question again, because the term Heidelbergensis has been used for over 100 years, and now it's causing confusion. In 2021, science invented a brand new species. In October 2021, a small paper was published in the journal Evolutionary Anthropology. The author, Mirjana Roksandich, a paleoanthropologist at the University of Manitoba, of Serbian origin, an expert on Europe's Middle Paleolithic fossils. The title of the paper was this: Resolving the Muddle in the Middle, the Case for Homo Bodoensis, Spot Nov. Roksandich's claim was the term Homo heidelbergensis no longer works, because under that label, very different skulls are being grouped together, those from Africa, those from Europe, all considered heidelbergensis together. But the European specimens from Atapuerca are close to Neanderthals. The African specimens, for example the Bodo skull in Ethiopia, are closer to Homo sapiens. These can't be the same species. Saying they are the same species is a crude denial of the evolutionary process. Roksandich's proposal? Let's reserve the term Heidelbergensis only for the European Atapuerca specimens. They evolved toward Neanderthals anyway. Let's give a new name to the African pre-sapiens Heidelbergensis-like specimens, Homo bodoensis. The name comes from the Bodo skull. The Bodo skull was found in 1976 in Ethiopia, in a region called Bodo Dar in the middle of the Awash Valley. American paleoanthropologist Glenn Conroy led the discovery. The skull was nearly complete. Age? 600,000 BCE. The Bodo skull had been classified as Heidelbergensis. Brain size? 1300 cc. Large face, prominent eyebrows, sloped forehead. But on its face, something not present on other Heidelbergensis skulls: cut marks. On the face of the Bodo skull, beneath the eyes, there were delicate cut marks made with stone blades. Modern forensic anthropology examined these marks. The conclusion? These marks were made shortly after death. The person had been killed or had been defleshed after death. Why deflesh? We don't know. For ritual? Perhaps. For cannibalism? Perhaps. Were the brain and organs removed? Possible. The Bodo skull is one of the world's oldest examples of face skinning. 600,000 BCE. In Roksandich's 2021 paper, the Bodo skull was proposed as the reference specimen for the new species, Homo bodoensis. The logic? All Heidelbergensis-like humans who lived in Africa between 700,000 and 200,000 BCE, evolving toward Homo sapiens, but not yet fully modern, they will now be called bodoensis. This includes the Bodo skull, also the Kabwe skull from Ethiopia, formerly known as Rhodesia man, the Turnafine skull from Algeria, the Eli Spring skull from Kenya. The proposal brings something big. The tangled labeling system that has accumulated in paleoanthropology over the past 100 years is being cleaned up.
What troubles people about the proposal is also big. The scientific community generally fears adding new species and renaming old ones, because the entire literature would have to be rewritten. Objections came in 2022. Some paleoanthropologists defended keeping Heidelbergensis. Some accepted the new species. In 2024, the debate continues. In academia, Bodoensis is in a contested state. But on some important points, Roxandic was right. First, the anatomical difference between Heidelbergensis in Europe and Heidelbergensis in Africa is really large. Jaw shape, cranial slope, forehead height, all different. Classifying them as the same species runs contrary to biological reality. Second, DNA data places European Heidelbergensis on the Neanderthal Denisovan branch and African specimens on the Sapiens branch. These are two separate genetic lineages. Third, a species name is just a label. The label has to represent reality better. Whatever the outcome, the Bodoensis debate showed that science is alive. Between 2010 and 2025, in 15 years, paleoanthropology has been rewritten 3 different ways. Naledi was discovered, the Maslia dating finding broke the paradigm, Jebel Irhoud pushed sapiens back 100,000 years, Denisovan was invented, Bodoensis was proposed. The last 15 years of this discipline are a revolution. The next 15 will be too, because there are still unnamed skulls in Asia. Now, let's go east, to China, because we can't end this story without looking at China's skulls. Let's go to northeast China, Heilongjiang Province, a region near the Russian border, the city of Harbin. The year 1933, the beginning of the Japanese occupation. In Harbin, a Chinese construction worker was working on the construction of a bridge over the Songhua River. During the foundation excavation of the bridge, a skull came out of the mud. The worker kept his name secret because the job was tied to the Japanese army. If he reported it to Japanese authorities, they would take the skull. He wasn't wrong about this. The Japanese occupation systematically looted China's archaeological heritage. The worker secretly took the skull home. He buried it next to his family's well. Then the war began. The worker migrated to other places. The skull lay underground beside the well for 88 years. In March 2018, the worker, on his deathbed, told his grandson the location of the skull. The family extracted it. They handed it over to Hebei Geological University. The Hebei team was astonished because what they held looked like a brand new species. Chinese paleoanthropologist Chang Ji and his team published 3 separate papers in the journal The Innovation in 2021. The results were clear. Age, at least 146,000 years, probably older. Brain size, 1420 cc, larger than modern humans. Anatomy, large face, prominent brow ridges, large eyes, powerful jaw. The G team proposed a new species, Homo longi. Long means dragon in Chinese. Dragon River, the old Chinese name for the Songhua. So, Dragon Man. What was this Homo longi? To some scientists, a brand new species. To others, the face of the Denisovan. Because until then, the Denisovan had only DNA samples and a few finger tooth bones. There was no complete skull. If the Harbin skull is Denisovan, then for the first time, we are seeing the Denisovan's face, a 1420 cc brain, larger than modern humans, a very large face, prominent brow ridges, a broad jaw. DNA extraction attempts have not yet been fully successful. The bones lay underground for 88 years, and DNA was largely degraded. There is some partial data, but full analysis is still ongoing. There is no answer, but the Harbin skull is there. 1,420 cc is there. A brain larger than modern humans is there. But China's shock story erupted again in 2024. Hubei Province, central China, the Yangtze region. In 1989-1990, 2 skulls had been found here, Yangtze 1 and Yangtze 2. For years, they were roughly classified as Heidelbergensis. Age estimate, 800,000 to 1 million years. May 2024, Li Wu and his team from the Chinese Academy of Sciences published a third Yangxian skull, Yangxian 3. Age, 1 million years. 1 million years ago, in China, there was another species, not the ancestor of Homo sapiens, not Heidelbergensis. The anatomy was strange. Brain size average, about 1,100 cc. But the internal shape and external form of the skull matched no previously known species exactly. The Li Wu team's conclusion? The Yangxian people may be the ancestor of Homo sapiens, but outside Africa. The weight of this sentence needs to be understood, because the claim of a sapiens ancestor outside Africa directly shakes the out-of-Africa hypothesis, meaning perhaps humanity didn't evolve in Africa, but in parallel on multiple continents.
This hypothesis is called multi-regional evolution. Multi-regional evolution. Milford Wolpoff defended it in the 1980s. It was rejected by the general academic community. Genetic data, especially the mitochondrial Eve study, supported the African origin hypothesis. Now, Yangxian 3 emerges. 1 million years in China. Possible ancestor of Homo sapiens. Is the multi-regional hypothesis back on the agenda? Academia isn't clear yet. Liu Wu's 2024 paper is considered contested. Most geneticists still view the claim of a sapiens ancestor outside Africa with skepticism. But Yangxian 3 is still there. A brain slightly smaller than modern humans, but proportionally identical to modern human brain ratio. The body isn't fully described because only the skull exists. In Chinese tradition, there's the Pangu myth. We discussed it in the previous journey. At the beginning of the universe was primordial chaos, and the giant Pangu cracked open the chaos egg, pushed the sky up and the earth down. Mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon were formed from his body. The parasites on his body into humans.
The first text to record the Pangu myth was written in the 3rd century BCE, but the oral tradition is much older, perhaps from millennia before. Humanity was born from Pangu's dead body, it is said. Could this ancient Chinese folk memory, that an earlier one disappeared and the next came from his pieces, carry the memory of pre-sapiens humans? The Yangxian people disappeared. We took their place. Pangu's body is our genetic inheritance. Speculative, but it stands parallel. There's something more concrete. China's Denisovan population. The finger bone found in Siberia in 2010 belonged to a single individual, but Denisovan DNA is widely distributed in indigenous Asian populations today. So the Denisovan population wasn't small. They must have lived across much of Asia. If the Harbin skull is Denisovan, China was the Denisovan homeland. If the Yangxian people are pre-sapiens, China was another parallel evolution center. If there's yet another, still unnamed species in China, which is possible, Asia was a multiple parallel laboratory. There is no answer, but the Harbin skull waited 88 years beside a well. Yangxian 3 is still emerging from the dig.
Until 2010, science had not descended deeply enough into China. Now it is. The next 10 years will produce much more. We open the last seal, the most disturbing one. The 6 seals we've looked at so far, Jebel Irhoud, Omo/Herto, Naledi, Heidelbergensis/Atapuerca, Bodunensis, China skulls, show the traces of paleoanthropology's rewrite in the last 15 years. Until 2010, science told humanity's story like this. Modern humans emerged in Africa, 200,000 years ago, in a single region. Then they spread to the world. Almost every word of this sentence has turned out to be wrong. In a single region? Wrong. Jebel Irhoud is at the other end of the continent, 315,000 years old. Pan-African origin. 200,000 years ago? Wrong. Sapiens is 315,000 years old, perhaps older. Then they spread to the world? Incomplete. After spreading, they mixed with others. Modern human is the most wrong part, because there is no single species at hand.
Now, let's look at the DNA data. These data are not from commercial DNA companies like 23andMe, Ancestry, MyHeritage, but from academic genetic research. Reich Lab at Harvard, Pebo's group at Max Planck, Synchronopin at UCLA.
The proportions in modern human DNA that come from other ancestral human species are as follows. Modern Europeans, 1.5 to 2.3% Neanderthal DNA. No one is 0%. If you have European ancestry, you are definitively carrying Neanderthal blood. Modern East Asians, 1.7 to 2.3% Neanderthal DNA, slightly more than Europeans. Hence, scientists hypothesize a second Neanderthal admixture wave. We mixed not once, but several times. Modern Melanesians, Papuans, some Filipino indigenous groups, 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA, plus 2 to 3% Neanderthal DNA. So a total of 6 to 9% non-modern human DNA. This is a very high proportion. It means the indigenous peoples of the Pacific come from extensive mixing. Modern Tibetans, the EPAS1 gene that lets them survive at high altitudes came directly from Denisovan. The people living above 4,000 meters on the Tibetan Plateau cope with oxygen deficiency thanks to a gene left by Denisovan.
Modern sub-Saharan Africans. The most shocking findings are here. Reich and Sankararaman's 2020 paper, 2 to 19% of the DNA of some West Africans comes from a still unidentified ghost population. This ghost population separated from the modern human family tree approximately 500,000 to 1 million years ago. Perhaps Nalidi's relatives, perhaps a sub-branch of Bodoensis, perhaps something else entirely. No bones. Modern East Asians, deeper scan. A study published in 2020 by Ayasi Della Pellegrini and others, a third ghost population trace was detected in East Asian DNA. Not yet defined, not yet named. Perhaps a descendant of the Yunxian people. Perhaps something else. Now, let's draw the big picture. If you are modern European, 96 to 97% Sapiens, plus 2 to 3% Neanderthal, plus trace possible ghost ancestor. If you are modern Asian, 96 to 98% Sapiens, plus 2 to 3% Neanderthal, plus 0 to 1% Denisova, plus trace possible ghost ancestor. If you are modern Melanesian, 88 to 93% Sapiens, plus 3% Neanderthal, plus 4 to 6% Denisova, plus possible second Denisova branch. If you are modern sub-Saharan African, 80 to 98% Sapiens, plus 2 to 19% unknown ghost ancestor, plus trace Neanderthal from later migrants. If you are modern Tibetan, 96 to 98% Sapiens, plus 2 to 3% Neanderthal, plus a critical breathing gene from Denisovan. No one is pure Sapiens. No one. Until the 1990s, science thought like this. Homo sapiens evolved, then other human species went extinct. Modern humanity is a separate category, a separate pure species. Now we know this is wrong. Modern humanity is not a separate species. We are the combined product of at least 5 different human species. Homo sapiens, our ancestors, the main line. Homo neanderthalensis, European West Asian cousin, extinct around 40,000 BCE, left 1 to 3% DNA. Homo denisovan, Siberian East Asian cousin, extinct between 30,000 to 50,000 BCE, left 4 to 6% DNA in Asian and Pacific peoples. Ghost population 1, Sub-Saharan Africa, unknown, left 2 to 19% DNA, no bones. Ghost population 2, Southeast Asia or elsewhere, second Denisovan branch, left trace DNA. Ghost population 3, East Asia, not yet named, left trace DNA. Possible and not yet discovered other populations. These are only the ones we know. New tests find new traces each year. In your DNA, there are traces of at least 4 different human species. Perhaps 5, perhaps 6, perhaps 7.
You are not Homo sapiens in the strict sense. You are the combined product of multiple human species who lived in the past.
Every cell of you, every piece of every gene carries different contributions from different ancestors. The person walking in the Berber Mountains 315,000 years ago is your ancestor. The person who died in Ethiopian marshes 195,000 years ago is your ancestor. The Heidelbergensis buried in a cave pit at Atapuerca is your ancestor. The Denisovan living in a cave in Siberia is your ancestor. The Neanderthal hunting in cold European taiga is your ancestor. The unnamed ancestor who lived in sub-Saharan Africa is your ancestor. All of them are in you, right now, as you read this sentence. It's strange to know this, because the idea that humanity is pure, separate, superior, not scientifically but culturally, had taken deep root in many civilizations. Now, this idea has no biological basis. There is no pure species called Homo Sapiens. You are a mixture. Most of your ancestors have gone extinct, but they all live in you. There is no answer, but the DNA is there.
7 seals, 1 story. Modern humans are not one species. They never were. Until the 1990s, science was telling the story of a clean, separate, independent species called Homo Sapiens. After the 2010s, this story collapsed. Jebel Irhoud, the faces walking in Morocco 315,000 years ago. Homo Kibish and Herto, parallel modern humans being born in Ethiopia. Mosaic evolution, parallel evolution across the continent. Not a single center, the whole continent. Then Naledi, a small-brained species that buried its dead, used fire, lived in caves. The same period as sapiens, the same continent. Consciousness isn't tied to brain size. Being human isn't only being sapiens. Then Heidelbergensis and its burial pit at Atapuerca. 28 individuals, 430,000 BCE. Perhaps the world's oldest grave. Heidelbergensis is the common ancestor of us, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. We all came from the same core line, then separated, then met again, and mixed. Then Bodoensis, the new species science invented in 2021. The old term Heidelbergensis is being retired for African pre-sapiens humans, a new name in its place, because they are a different line. Because labels must better represent reality. Then China, Harbin's skull, hidden beside a well for 88 years. Perhaps Denisovan, perhaps a brand new species. Yunxian 3 was published in 2024, 1 million years. Perhaps a sapiens ancestor outside Africa. Perhaps the multi-regional hypothesis. Even in 2024, science is reopening questions. And finally, DNA. Modern humans aren't pure. No one is pure. We are all hybrids. 5, perhaps 6, perhaps 7 different human species combined. Some species have bones, Neanderthal, Denisova. Others have no bones, only DNA traces. Ghost populations, nameless ancestors. This is not a simple science update. This is a change in humanity's fundamental story about itself. For millennia, religious texts, mythological traditions, even early science described humanity as separate from other living things, a pure category, specially created by gods, independent.
Then Darwin came. Humanity isn't separate from other living things. We're a part of them, he said. It deeply disturbed people. Then in the 2010s, Denisovan, Naledi, Mislia, Epidema, Jebel Irhoud, Bodoensis, Longi, Yunxian came. Now humanity isn't pure, even within its own species. We are the product of multiple species mixing. More disturbing. Perhaps one day, and this isn't a bad thing, we'll understand how normal this is. Nature loves mixing, not purity, but mosaic. Not purity, but evolution.
The Sumerian mythic ancestor, Oannes, came from the sea. The Hebrew Eden, the memory of a core people. The Berber Ikalan, perhaps the ghost of Jebel Irhoud. The Ethiopian Wega, perhaps a relative of Homo Sapiens. The Basque Mairu, perhaps the ghosts of Atapuerca. The Chinese Pangu, perhaps the reflection of Yunxian. All these legends were transmitted for millennia. Perhaps they all remember our different ancestors. Perhaps they are all the oral memory of the different species living in us. There is no answer.
But the myth is there. The bones are there. The DNA is there. All of it is there. And you, right now, as you read this sentence, are the hybrid descendant of dozens of ancestors whose names you have only just learned. There's one more question I left unanswered. The ancestors we've looked at so far are, in the great majority, our size or close to our build. Heidelbergensis is a bit stronger than us. Neanderthal is shorter and stronger than us. Denisovan is presumably close to us. Naledi is much smaller-brained than us, but close in body. But in Indonesia, between 100,000 and 50,000 BCE, there's a species only 1 meter tall, brain capacity 380 cc, smaller than Naledi, but making stone tools, living contemporaneously with modern humans. They named it Homo floresiensis, but local people give it another name, Ebu Gogo, the old woman who eats. Because the indigenous people of the island of Flores tell that their ancestors met small people, and that those small people were cannibals. Science discovered it in 2003. The local people had known for millennia. In the Philippines, on the island of Luzon in 2007, another small species was found, Homo luzonensis. Again, 1 meter tall, again small-brained, again contemporaneous with modern humans. And in 2024, on a smaller island in Indonesia, another skull came out. Not yet named, not yet fully published, but according to the first data, smaller, perhaps 80 centimeters tall, brain below 350 cc. In our next journey, we'll go to the dwarf human species of Indonesia and the Philippines, their hobbit-like remaining descendants, how island geography shaped humans, and were they really cannibals? We'll follow them. Of what you've seen so far, which disturbed you most? Write in the comments. What do you say about brain size? Is consciousness really tied to brain size? Which of your ancestors, Naledi, Heidelbergensis, Denisovan, or the unknown ghost, reaches you most? Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe. Don't miss the next journey. Eridu still stands. The Boof Cave is still there. The Jebel Irhoud skull is still in the Rabat Museum. Atapuerca's Cima de los Huesos still holds its 28 individuals. The Harbin skull is still emerging from beside the well. And in your DNA, right now, sits the trace of ancestors whose names you don't yet know. And in your DNA, right now, sits the trace of ancestors whose names you don't yet know.